For centuries, the name of Rome was synonymous with conquest. At the heart of this relentless machine lay the Roman legion, a disciplined professional force that seemed destined to conquer the known world. Its soldiers, the legionaries, were mythologized as near unbeatable warriors who built an empire stretching from the sands of Africa to the mists of Britannia. But the truth is more complex. The legions were not born invincible. They were forged by necessity, constantly adapted and repeatedly brought to the brink of annihilation. The legion story begins not with a glorious conquest, but with existential threat. In the early Roman Republic, military service was the duty of property-owning citizens organized by wealth. This system, known as the Camillan system, was rigid and often ineffective against specialized enemies. The shock of the Gallic sack of Rome in 390 BC forced Rome to rethink its entire military structure. The true birth of the iconic legion came during the fierce struggles of the 4th and 3rd centuries BC, replacing the rigid Greek-style phalanx with the flexible maniple system. Instead of a single dense line, the army was divided into smaller checkerboard units, maniples, allowing them to maneuver on varied Italian terrain. This revolutionary adaptability was the legion's first secret weapon. Each maniple was structured by age and experience. The young Hastati fought first, followed by the more experienced Principes, and finally the veteran Triarii, the last reliable line, giving rise to the famous Roman saying, "It comes down to the Triarii." The ultimate test of this system came against their greatest foe, Carthage and its brilliant general, Hannibal Barca. The Second Punic War, 218 to 201 BC, was a bloodbath that nearly erased Rome from history. Hannibal's legendary march over the Alps, complete with war elephants, led to a series of crushing defeats for Rome, exposing the legion's weaknesses. The disaster reached its peak at the Battle of Cannae in 216 BC. Hannibal, though severely outnumbered, executed perhaps the greatest tactical maneuver in history, the double envelopment. He allowed his center to slowly give ground, drawing the dense Roman legions into a deadly semicircle trap, while his superior cavalry swept around the flanks and closed the trap. Up to 70,000 Roman soldiers were killed in a single day, a casualty rate so immense that it forced Rome to militarize every able-bodied man and redesign its entire strategy. Cannae demonstrated a brutal truth. The legions could be beaten and crushed by superior generalship and tactical innovation. But Rome's enduring secret was its sheer tenacity, its refusal to surrender. They never negotiated with Hannibal, instead slowly rebuilding their armies, avoiding direct confrontation, and eventually taking the war to Carthage itself under the brilliant command of Scipio Africanus. The victory at Zama in 202 BC finally proved that Roman resilience, backed by Scipio's tactical brilliance, could overcome even Hannibal's genius. The Republic survived and the legion evolved, hardened by the blood of its greatest defeat. The late Republic saw the legion transform from a citizen militia into a truly professional standing army, a shift driven by the social and military needs of a growing empire. The catalyst for this change was Gaius Marius. By the end of the 2nd century BC, Rome faced manpower shortages. Wealthy citizens were reluctant to serve, and the requirements for property ownership excluded the vast impoverished urban and rural population. The capite censi, counted by head. In 107 BC, Marius implemented the revolutionary Marian reforms, fundamentally changing the legion's identity. Marius opened military service to all citizens regardless of property. The state provided the armor, weapons, and training. This had two monumental effects. One, professionalization. It created a standing, highly disciplined army. Soldiers now served for 20 years, transforming them into career professionals rather than temporary citizen soldiers. 2. Loyalty shift. Since soldiers depended on their general for pay, bonuses, and ultimately land grants upon discharge, their primary allegiance shifted from the Senate and the Republic to their commanding general. This sowed the seeds of the Republic's destruction. The new Marian legion became famous for its standardized equipment, the heavy segmented lorica segmentata, though this came later, the iconic rectangular scutum shield, the short thrusting gladius sword, and the defining weapon, the pilum, a heavy javelin designed to bend upon impact, rendering the enemy's shield useless and unusable. Every legionary also carried his own tools, food, and defenses, earning them the nickname Marius's Mules. This self-sufficiency allowed the legions to march faster and deeper into hostile territory, making Roman logistics unparalleled. However, the invincibility myth was consistently shattered on the battlefield when Roman arrogance superseded caution. The most catastrophic defeat following the Marian reforms occurred at the Battle of Cannae in 53 BC. Led by Marcus Licinius Crassus, 7 full legions marched deep into Parthian territory, modern Iran. The legions, designed for close-quarters infantry combat, were completely outmatched by the Parthian cataphracts, heavy armored cavalry, and highly mobile horse archers. Crassus underestimated the enemy and failed to secure adequate supplies and reconnaissance. The Parthians simply rode circles around the fixed Roman formation, showering them with thousands of arrows, avoiding any direct engagement where the gladius could be used. Roman soldiers died by dehydration, exhaustion, and arrows, unable to fight back. Crassus himself was killed and nearly 20,000 legionaries died, with 10,000 captured, a staggering loss that became a permanent stain on Roman military history. Cannae demonstrated the legion's critical weakness: extreme vulnerability to highly mobile, ranged warfare in open, unsuitable terrain. As the empire stabilized, the legions ensured the Pax Romana, but their political power grew too large. Generals like Sulla, Pompey, and most famously Julius Caesar used the loyalty of their legions to wage civil war, ultimately destroying the republic they were sworn to protect. The legions became the tools not of the state but of ambitious warlords. Under the Roman Empire, the legion reached its most standardized and formidable state. Augustus established a permanent standing army of about 28 legions, later reduced, stationed primarily along the great frontier borders, limes. The legion was now a force of stability, but also an instrument of brutal pacification. During the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, the legions were at their peak professionalism. The soldiers spent more time building forts, roads, bridges, and walls, like Hadrian's Wall, than they did fighting. This engineering prowess was a hidden strength. It allowed Rome to maintain rapid communication, supply, and movement across vast distances, effectively shrinking the empire. However, the legions faced continuous, costly failures against enemies who mastered asymmetric warfare and knew their local terrain intimately. The most famous defeat of the early empire occurred in the Teutoburg Forest in 9 AD. 3 full legions, legions 17, 16, and 99, led by Publius Quinctilius Varus, were ambushed by a coalition of Germanic tribes under the leadership of Arminius, a former Roman auxiliary officer who knew Roman tactics intimately. Varus was marching his legions through dense, muddy forest terrain, stretched out in a long, vulnerable column. Confident in Roman discipline, Arminius waited for the perfect moment. The Germanic warriors, using the thick forest and heavy rain to neutralize Roman discipline and maneuverability, attacked the exposed column for 3 days. The tight Roman formations, perfect for open battle, were rendered useless in the woods. The Roman commanders could not see or communicate effectively. The result was the complete annihilation of all 3 legions, over 15,000 men lost. The defeat was so profound that Emperor Augustus allegedly cried out, "Quinctilius Varus, give me back my legions." Rome never again tried to permanently conquer the area between the Rhine and Elbe rivers, setting a final defensive boundary. Teutoburg demonstrated that Roman military organization was worthless if the commander ignored intelligence, chose the wrong terrain, and allowed the enemy to dictate the terms of the fight. Another significant continuous problem was the legion's reliance on auxiliaries. Non-citizen specialized troops like cavalry, archers, and light infantry, recruited from subject peoples. While auxiliaries provided essential skills the heavy legionaries lacked, their use came with inherent risk. In places like Britannia and Dacia, repeated revolts often saw former auxiliary troops turn their Roman training and Roman-issued weapons against the legions themselves. In the later empire, as pressure mounted on all borders, the quality of the legions began to degrade. Manpower shortages became endemic, training declined, and the limitanae, border guards, were often agriculturalists who served only part-time, diluting the professional core that had once made the legion supreme. The final slow decline was already set in motion. By the 3rd and 4th centuries AD, the legions were under siege. The constant barbarian incursions and the massive economic cost of maintaining such a large, decentralized military machine strained the empire to its breaking point. The legionary structure itself adapted again, shifting away from the 6,000-man fighting unit to smaller, more mobile units, under 1,000 men. New cavalry forces, often recruited from Germanic or Gothic peoples, became crucial, acknowledging the infantry's limitations that had been brutally exposed by the Parthians and other mobile enemies. Despite these changes, catastrophic defeats continued, often at the hands of highly skilled nomadic horsemen. The Battle of Adrianople in 378 AD against the Visigoths is considered the death knell of the classic legion. Emperor Valens, rushing into battle without proper intelligence, allowed the Visigoth heavy cavalry to smash the Roman line, killing the emperor and destroying 2/3 of his field army. Adrianople proved that the age of the heavy Roman infantry dominance was over, and the future belonged to the heavy cavalry, the very forces Rome had long struggled to master. The truth of the Roman legions is that they were not invincible, but rather incredibly resilient and adaptable. Their genius lay in their engineering, their logistical superiority, and their political tenacity, the ability to lose a battle, even 70,000 men at Cannae, and still come back to win the war. Their legacy is not merely military, but foundational to Western civilization. The legions spread Roman law, Latin, which evolved into the Romance languages, and Roman engineering across Europe, serving as the essential tool for the Romanization of vast territories. The modern term army, the concept of military engineering, and much of the terminology of organized warfare derived directly from the legions. The legions never truly conquered the world, nor did they remain undefeated. But their triumphs and their defeats carved the map of Europe and set the foundational bedrock for the next 2 millennia. The story of their victories is magnificent, but the story of their failures is perhaps more important. It is the story of how a flexible system, hardened by loss and driven by unyielding will, created the longest-lasting empire of the West.